It's now time to introduce our main speaker for the evening. It's Johnny from Laguna Beach.
Hi, my name is John Eckelin, and I'm an alcoholic. And I am enthusiastic about this program, grateful for this way of life. It's terrific. And thanks for the invitation. And Mike has told me when I had to get off, it's a good beginning. I am really impressed with that generation of Kenny and Andy and that bunch of guys that help one another and stay sober and active in Alcoholics Anonymous and go to school and be self-supporting and work and have commitments. And Alcoholics Anonymous has nothing to worry about as long as we have a bunch like that growing up here. And it's great. Of course, he has no humility at all. And you're a warm-up speaker. You're supposed to leave a little bit for me. I love you guys. Well, I have a lot of friends in this room that I love very much. And you have never seen me before in a very short while. You will know me very intimately. And that's just one of the neat things that happens in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we can know each other on that level. And, it can't be helped. I come into these rooms these days, and always some old-timer says, "Oh, him again." Doesn't give you really a build-up, A few years ago, I was invited to speak in Flagstaff at the conference. The guy who invited me, he was old like myself. And I asked him, I said, "You invited me here 7 years ago, 11 years ago, 19 years ago, and 27 years ago. I said, why do you invite me again?" He said, "I wanted to hear you one more time before you die." He said, it was funny then. Besides that, you're probably looking at the most famous substitute speaker on the West Coast. And that started long ago. Sometimes the circuit speakers are invited to 2 different locations the same weekend. And 36 years ago, Dr. Paul, you call him, God rest his soul, he was only a year sober, but he was already a circuit speaker. And he was invited to Vancouver, Canada, and to Hawaii the same weekend. And his wife, Max, God rest her soul, she wanted to go to Hawaii. So they said, "Why don't we send John to Vancouver?" So that was my first big deal. I came up, there was 4,500 people at that conference. Guy picked me up at the airport. His name was Corky Berg, and he picked me up and took me to this hotel where it all went on. Don't worry about it. And we're standing there in the lobby, and this lady came up to Corky and said, "Hi, how are you?" And he said, "I'm really good, how are you?" She said, "You don't remember me, do you?" He said, "Sure, honey, but I'm rather busy with this gentleman right now." So she left. I said, "Corky, she wanted to talk to you. You don't have to babysit me, everybody are friendly." I said, "Go and talk to her." He left, came back 10 minutes later, said, "That's the damnedest thing I ever run into." I said, "What happened?" I came over there and said, "Hi, how are you?" And she said, "You don't remember me, do you?" He said, "Sure, honey, what meeting did I meet you at?" She said, "For God's sake, man, I was your second wife, A little bit of a blackout, I suppose. I don't think I'm too presumptuous. If I say that some of us here tonight sit with a bunch of burdens and lots of if-onlys, but be that as it may, we are here in these rooms are still the lucky ones because we have a chance. Lots of people have this thing called alcoholism, doesn't have a chance, and for various reasons. For the record, my grandfather died from alcoholic delirium, 1910. He lived in a 2,000-acre place outside Stockholm. They were breeding racehorses. But he died from alcoholic delirium. My father had a problem with his liver in 1927. Nobody had any knowledge about this illness then. He was sick in cancer for 3 years and then he died. Something to see. A beautiful human being like he once was. But in 3 years he had deteriorated to absolutely nothingness, And my older brother didn't have much of a chance for another reason. He had a little bit of pride, and it seems to be a commodity. We can't afford a luxury in this outfit. More than 26 years ago now, he lived in a castle outside Stockholm, married to a very beautiful girl. In fact, he married my girlfriend. I had a little bit of problem with that for a while, but now I'm glad he did. But he drank like I drank, and he blew it all. For 18 years, this guy lived in a room that cost $15 a month to live in, drank a fifth of whiskey every night, and lived in a pad, and there was nothing ever wrong with him, This guy, earned $150,000 a year, spoke 6 languages fluently, carried a Swedish flag in the Olympics on 3 occasions. But for 18 years he lived in this goddamn room. I tried to help him a few times. I wrote him a letter, a page and a half, what I used to be like, and 3.5 pages about all the wonders that has happened to me since I joined the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a postcard back. Said, "Dear John, I'm sorry to hear about all your problems." I flew to Stockholm in 1978 to spend a couple of weeks with him. I invited him out here. He came out here and lived with us for a month. I took him to AA meetings. He met all our friends here in Laguna Beach and Monarch Beach in this area, and he had a great time here for a whole month, One night, Lynn Wilder had a party at his house after the Wednesday night meeting. And there was 150 people at that. And I said to Lynn, he's ready to jump out of his skin. So he gave him a tall, highball glass of scotch, And my brother was 6'4", handsome as hell. And all the young women in A was up there rubbing up against him, And he was a fascinating guy, And he had the best time of his life when he stood down and got that all attention. Last night before he should fly back to Sweden, I said, "What do you think about this thing?" He said, "You don't understand, I don't want to quit. It's the only thing that's real in my life. When I sit there by myself and drink my scotch and think about and dream about when I was on top of everything." I said, "I understand." So he flew home. He died 11 months later in Yellow Yanders. Prime of his life, My younger brother's conscription lawyer twice. First time was more than 20 years ago. Now they told him then that his liver was shot and they couldn't drink anymore. He's still drinking. And sometimes you and I wonder, what's wrong with people like my brothers? Really nothing wrong with them. Alcohol did something for my older brother to the day he died. It's still doing something for my younger brother. And that's the nature of illness. And that's why I said in the beginning that you and I are the lucky ones. Because of the evidences in these rooms that people like you and I, the way we drank and carried on, we can change and live without and have a fabulous life. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. How to live good out there without it. I talk to newcomers. I love the feelings in these rooms when there are newcomers. And I like being a newcomer myself. I like to remember when I was new in AA. When I had about 2 weeks of sobriety and gone to a meeting every night, and I sat in these rooms and I realized that something is going on here called hope. I hope I never forget the last year I drank because I compromised on everything I believed in and stood for. I couldn't live or function without liquor. I didn't dare to go to sleep if I didn't have a fifth of whiskey in the refrigerator because I had to have it when I woke up. And if I ran out of booze at midnight, I usually called an associate of mine in Baldwin Park and said, Hal, next week you will owe me $150 on this particular job. But if you give me $20 tonight, you won't have to pay me the $130 next week. And I drove a 100-mile round trip to pick up a $20 bill. I didn't dare to buy any booze in Baldwin Park because then I wouldn't make it home. And when I came home to Anaheim, where we lived at the time, I bought a fifth of Imperial Bourbon for $4.85. And then I was safe, and I had to live like that, and I hope I never forget that period in my life. I know some of us, after we get a little well and get a few dollars in our pockets and bedroom privileges again, we forget how it really was. Jesus, John, for God's sake, wake up. You know, I asked them to put on the lights so I could see you, the guys who are going to sleep here tonight, you know. I mean, show a little respect, for God's sake, you know. You know, one other line about what I like to hear when I remember when I was new. This guy was up here talking, and he said, yeah, about this insanity and this denial. He said, I drove down the highway in my Corvette, 140 miles an hour. I rolled it 6 times, came up on the other side and said, never again am I going to buy a goddamn Chevy. You know? I mean, ain't that how we are? I didn't start to drink until I was 31, you know, and it doesn't sound so promising right now, but that's how it was. But I'll share with you how I was when I was young. And I didn't drink when I was young because when my father died, I promised my grandmother I was never going to drink, so I didn't drink. When I was 18 years old, I had gone to college a year. The war broke out. I went in the Air Force for 2.5 years. And after that, I went back to college for 1.5 years, and I was selling it and trying to help my mom. It was important to me to play the man or the house part because my older brother was different. He was brilliant in school. He had scholarships to universities, and everything was made out for him. But I was different, and I could never figure him and me out in the first. You know, this guy, he never opened a book, had A's in everything. I could study to 1 in the morning. I still failed. It really bothered me. Fuck it, it's still bothering me. I'm very willing. I try real hard, and I can be good for a short time. But when the bottom fell out or something negative, I couldn't figure out why I was such a screw-up. When I was young, I had an unbelievable inferiority complex, and I was really screwed up, you know. And I tell you, when I was 10, 12 years old, I started to have real problem with my father dying so soon, and I started to play games like if I was a good kid, he was going to come back to me as a reward. And I lived in illusions and fantasies for years. I needed a drink long before I started to drink. My mother sent me to a psychiatrist when I was there, till I was in my 20s. I was really screwed up. But when I was 31 years old, I was employed by this door factory in Alhambra. My boss was alcoholic, and he taught me how to drink every day. And a new life began for me. It was the most fabulous experience I ever had in my life. You know, we started to have early times at 8 o'clock in the morning, cocktails at 10, martini lunches from 12 to 2:30, made a couple of calls calling on these big developers in the afternoon, went back to the office and typed up beats from 6 to midnight and drank whiskey, and I thought I landed in heaven, you know. I mean, that booze made me so comfortable, you know. It was just like I couldn't miss. The door factory I worked for was Pre-Fit Door Company. They were the first people to manufacture pre-hung door openers, and I was right in it from the beginning. And, you know, I'm calling on these big developers, you know. I drank a fifth of booze a day. For 2 years, I was never drunk, never hungover. I just felt good. Something wrong with your system if you can drink that much liquor. I had an enormous capacity. And I'm calling up to these S&S Construction and Kaufman and brought in these big guys that build thousands of homes every year. And up on Wilshire Boulevard in Mr. Chappelle's office, and I had given him a bid on these attractive homes he was building. And he's sitting there looking and said, John, this is a very interesting concept. And I said, Mr. Chappelle, I think that we should stick together. He said, I didn't know you were Jewish. I said, right now I am. I've been drinking since 8 in the morning. This is 2:30 in the afternoon. And he just laughed and signed a contract and said, get the hell out of here, give me good. So I had a blast drinking for the first few years, I had no problem with alcohol until I tried to stop drinking. Ain't that something? When I started to try to stop drinking, I had problems with my booze. My wife complained. First time she said, Johnny, if you don't stop drinking, I go back to Sweden again. I said, please, don't do this to me. You have no idea how well I'm doing. I felt marvelous. And then we argued about it, and then I lied and cheated and carried on about it and had to hide it and do all that thing, And in 2 years into my drinking, I was up to 2/5 of whiskey a day. The last 10 months I drank, it didn't matter. I drank codeine cough medicine in the morning. I drank 2 bottles of codeine cough medicine a day, 2 3/5 of whiskey a day, and 6 Andersons 4 times a day, and I was absolutely weird at those 10 months, I couldn't get drunk and I couldn't get sober, and the guilt was on all the time, and I was going crazy, and I probably wasn't. I was just afraid that my wife was going to figure out how I had to live to function. And sometimes we talk here about the alcoholic loneliness. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing like it. It's a total isolation. We drink to live, and we know we are dying. There's no way out, and that's how it is. We started over many times, and every time I had the best intention, and every time it got worse. The last 4 years I drank, every time I stopped drinking, I started to get the shakes. And then 2 shots of booze stopped the shakes, I could function and works. So then I had to con myself into why I had to drink all the time. And from then on it gets worse. 2 years later, when I stopped drinking, I sat straight up in my bed at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and this big white snake came out of the wall. I never saw anything like it in my life. It came right out of the wall. Snow White had 3 black eyes. He was this big in diameter on his fat spot. He was 23 feet long. He come slowly across the room, started in front of my face, started to hiss at me. I could even smell him. He kind of smelled like death. And I sat down and said to myself, I haven't had a drink for 3 days, so it can't be the booze. Anybody here had any hallucinations? Oh, you're all a bunch of high-bottom drunks in this room tonight? That my experience with it, the closer he came, the more I screamed. And the noise in my head from my own scream reached such a crescendo, it was eventually, my brain exploded for my own scream. That was how it was for me. My wife told me in the morning, she said, something strange happened this morning around 4 o'clock. She said, you sat straight up, looked in front of you for quite a while, and then you said, ee. Isn't that a trip? One night I made love to her when she wasn't even there. And that's kind of tricky. She was actually laying 2 feet away from me now, and she said, what are you doing over there? I said, I beg your pardon. She realized what was going on. She started to laugh at me. I started to cry. I felt it was so humiliating to laugh at the guy who was doing his best. In the morning, I'd been out in the kitchen. I'd had my codeine coffee and my whiskey, and she met me in the hallway. Said, well, good morning, lover boy. I had no pain. I just smiled. So that's the best peace I've had in a long time. A few days before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was picked up a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in Anaheim at Thrifty Mart trying to steal a pint of liquor for $3.57. You should have seen me then. I was drunken and shaven. I weighed 246 pounds. I couldn't even defend myself. I just stood on and whimpered, it can't be me. I mean, look where I came from. I was brought up in a beautiful family under the most favorable circumstances. But that morning in Anaheim, I looked exactly like a person who has to steal a pint of liquor to live, you know. My wife had had a suicide attempt a few years before because she thought I didn't love her anymore. That wasn't how it was at all. I could not leave a function without booze at that time of my life. And then came that last ultimatum when she said, for years, because of the children we have stayed together, but now because of them we have to part. And either you go down and try that thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, or you have to move out again. And I'd been kicked out before. The only reason I went down to the Ilana Club in Anaheim, I didn't want to be kicked out. I come in there, I was a lady behind the coffee bar, said, do you have a drinking problem? I said, no. Get along just famously with it. Can you do something for my wife? She's crazy. And that's how it is when we don't know this is going to work and we got to cover on. But I'll tell you another thing. If I had known how sick I was when I came in, I would never have stayed. Because stopping drinking wouldn't have fixed that. And what I'm talking about here is by the grace of God. Many of us, had we known how bad it is when we come in, we would do something more drastic. But there's a line in the big book that covers us, more will be revealed. And thank God for that line. And next morning it happened to me. I woke up in the morning, I went out in the kitchen and drank my codeine Kaufman's and my whiskey, polished off a pint of Seagram 7 and drove down to the Alona Club and came in there and said, please call my wife, tell her I'm here already. And then I proceeded to tell them why I couldn't be an alcoholic. You know, I live in a beautiful home with a swimming pool. I have 3 automobiles and an English bulldog. I have a dapple grey Arabian parked in an orange grove here next to where we live. And you know, I play a little music. I fantasize a little bit. I'm trying to put things together, and that sure as hell cannot be alcoholism. And there was one gentleman there that said that son of a bitch will never make it, you know. And then I went out and had 4 double martinis for lunch and came back and said, call my wife again to tell her I was there for the second time to show how sincere I was. And then I should go home and buy a 5th. I've been to AA 3 times today. And then there was this guy that had listened to me all morning when I stood there mouthing off, you know. And, you know, there's a pamphlet here that's called A Member's Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alan McGinnis wrote it, and screenwriter, and we were dear friends. I find it the finest pamphlet I can read when it comes to what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. And what happened in that pamphlet, or to him, was exactly what happened to me that morning. There was a guy that had listened to me. His name was Charlie Vick. He became my sponsor. And I tell you something. I had tried all my life to be the best I could and do the best I could all the way, and I was beaten in every area of my life. It really was a great tragedy. And this guy, he sits back there, you know, and I have just been picked up trying to steal that booze, and you know, and he says to me, Johnny, why don't you come home with me and let us talk? I said, okay. It was so pathetic, you know. And we sit in his patio and he tells me a story on that, what I think is important in Alcoholics Anonymous. One drunk talking to another. The identification between the two. When he was through with his story, I realized he was worse than I was, and he depended more than I did, and he was sober. And I said, you were that bad and you don't have to drink no more? And he said, that's right. I said, Charlie, you don't understand. Every time I stop drinking, I get the shakes, and weird things happens to me when I stop drinking. And he said, Johnny, you will only shake for 4 or 5 days, and then you never have to shake again as long as you live. And I didn't. I sat down and I thought, what information this guy is coming up with here. And then I more or less broke. I said, show me what to do. I was in a meeting that night, and when they read portion of chapter 5 that we heard here this evening, I just said, please God help me today to stay sober. And it wasn't a big deal, you know. I always thought the spiritual experience would be something like, yes, John, what can I do for you, you know. But it wasn't like that at all. It was merely a feeling. And my thoughts were these, that perhaps after all this dies away from me too. I came home that night, I said to Karen, I said, you know, it happened to me tonight. I don't have to drink anymore. And she said, your eyes look different. I haven't had a drink of alcohol or any codeine, cough medicine, no strange pills or funny cigarettes since that day. It's 40 years and 6 months and 10 days ago today, you know. You all knew, you might sit down and say to yourself, it must be easy for you to have all the time on the program. But it wasn't easy then, and that's what we are dealing with right now. You know, I was not a great success when I came in here. I had a lot of anxieties about my kids. We had 3 beautiful girls and a son, you know. They were 13, 10, 8, and 6 years old when I came into AA. And, you know, I was $36,000 in the hole. They were all small bills and due. Karen's suicide drove me crazy. It's her attempt. You know, it's hard to live with yourself when you realize that you have broken another human being's spirit. But I didn't drink and I went to meeting. That's all I had going for me for quite a while. But I just like to tell you all new, those first 2 months of my sobriety, I couldn't handle nothing. When the phone rang at home, I just pointed at it. I said, you know, and I split and ran into my closet and sat on the floor and wept. I was scared to death. I sat in a meeting on 10 days sober and blurted out, you guys don't understand, but I feel so goddamn guilty. And that was an old timer that said, the reason you feel so guilty is because you're guilty. Oh. And you know, and I could kind of admit it. You know, if you pin it on somebody else, well, you know, I realized whatever they did or she did or whatever, I drove them. And when I took it on that basis, I was free, you know. And you know, then the end of the meeting, I stood up on myself and I regretted that I had copped out in the middle of my fault. The only thing I knew was I could not go back to drink. No matter what, I couldn't escape. I had done enough time. I had no more right to do. And you know, I actually taken the first 2 steps in the program and didn't know it. But how do you turn your will and life over to God as you understand it? What's the spiritual experience in these rooms? That happened to me moments later. I stood out alone and afraid, and this guy come up to me. I never saw him before. It's like John. He just comes over and put his arm around me and said, Johnny, everything is going to be all right. And I believed him. That's how it began for me with a higher power. It was just like those guys that my welfare taught. And I trusted them. For quite a while, those same guys gave me the courage to face my wrongs and my difficulties. And they talked to me in a fashion I never experienced. They didn't point fingers. There was no judgment. They just shared their own experiences from heart to heart. And this love and this care that goes on in these rooms is really the most healing commodity we can offer or being offered. It suits us back to good health, and it gives us a God of our very own that we can trust under any condition. It's here for everybody. Nobody is excluded. Karen didn't believe I was going to stay sober when I came in. It took 2 years of sobriety even before she realized I meant business. And we hoped they would believe us, but I understood another. She didn't dare to believe it. You know, the last 4 years I drank, I'd been on the wagon several times, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so on. And you know, and you know, to appease her. And then every time we became friends, I went back to drinking again. So she didn't dare to believe that I was going to stay sober and was serious about it. And you see, when it comes to trust, it's nothing we can demand. It's something we have to earn. And that's what the day at a time is all about. And besides that, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in this room between you and me. Come here, you're doing fine, hang in, that's going to get better. And we have this whole support group here, and we don't have to go through nothing alone anymore. It's incredible. And I had 6 months of sobriety. I'm up early. I go to work early. I go to a meeting every night. And I'm 6 months sober. Come up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and my wife meets me in the hallway, and looking at me with those little beady Allen eyes, and. And then she said, before you had a booze, there's a crush. Now you have those goddamn meetings. Or that kind of a weakling who can't stand on your own 2 feet. I said, I suppose so. And then I go to work. And I work all day, come home at 5:15 to have a bite to eat before I go to my meeting. I had 25 phone calls about the people I owe the money to. $36,000. I had no income after that period of time yet. I had no money at all. I didn't know what to do, and all. 25 phone calls about they wanted to. So I called my sponsor, and I said, Charlie, they want my money. He said, no, they want their money. So I tell you what happened. I went on a strict budget. I worked hard. I went to a meeting every day. And I bought money orders twice a month. It took me 4.5 years to pay back that $36,000. And when I had paid that back, there was no resentment. I had bought my freedom, and it was a very important part of my financial amends that we go through here in the 12 Steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, So that is about that. So that night, I had a quick bite to eat. I go to my meeting. I have a reprieve here for an hour and a half. I come home at 10:30, supposed to thank God for my sobriety that day. And I lay down in my bed, and I said, God, what a terrible day I've had. What an absolutely terrifying day I've had. And I said, yeah, but I didn't drink. I said, what's going on? I used to get drunk over a lot less. And then it begins. Because then we start to realize that this thing called sobriety, it's mine. It's my own. It's the only decent thing that has happened to me in a long time. It must be some sort of a gift or something. And then begins a consistency in our living, and then we add to it. And from now on, everything is God's business, good and bad. And if God is part of the bad stuff is just a period within a period. And when we have gone through that period, we realize why we had to go through it. It all starts to make sense here. So this thing called sobriety, that's the big deal here. Many people say, when will my ship come in? This is the ship. But there's more to than that. In the admission and the acceptance and the sobriety, it said those 3 things to me is a divine intervention. It says in chapter 3, we have to concede our innermost self we are alcoholic. That's the first step of recovery. The admission and the acceptance, those 3 things, because 9 out of 10 alcoholics never make it because they don't buy what I'm talking about. 9 out of 10 alcoholics either die or go crazy from this illness because they don't buy what I'm talking about. 9 out of 10 alcoholics have periods of sobriety, go in and out of care units, in and out of treatments, and in and out of meeting rooms because they don't buy them. It's a fact. And today we have addicts, alcoholics. What's the difference? An heroin addict doesn't identify with the people on coke. The people on coke feel superior to alcoholics for one reason or another. Maybe the price tag have a little bit of snob appeal, I don't know. And they say if I had a program like Alcoholics Anonymous, Coke Anonymous, Narcotics, I have a lot of credibility, help a lot of people. But what's wrong with us? Why is it only 1 out of 10 of us that have a consistency in sobriety? It's like Clancy said, my case is different. I'm not really an alcoholic like them. And there we are, And, it is quite a fantastic revelation. And then, I like to say this, what is the difference between an alcoholic and an addict? An addict is trying to get out of reality. We alcoholics trying to fit into reality. But the recovery program is the same. Total abstinence in the 12 steps. And I have watched you addicts now for over 30 years. You don't seem to drink a hell of a lot better than we did, So join what you're supposed to join. We can't beat this rap. So now my sobriety is right. My AA life is good. My work starts to go better. The kids come home from school. Hi, Dad, can we talk? Now, every day you and I get staying sober, life is getting better in spite of us. And there have been days in my life, in my sobriety, the only thing that was right that day, I didn't have to drink. I didn't have to drink that day. and it's worthwhile to fight for. Don't give up before the miracle happens. And then 2 years later, my wife comes and says, it wasn't always your fault. I said, now I can die, you know what I mean? Long ago, she said, you know, this life we live today, it really is the most fabulous adventure. And it was so hopeless and tragic at one time it completely turned around. There's even a degree of innocence between us today. And that's almost impossible to believe, but that has come to pass because she is just as busy in Al-Anon as I'm in AA. We have seen so many people over the years to turn around and start to be good to one another. Nothing is in vain. All that bad stuff you and I had to take them through will benefit somebody else down the line, so don't even worry about it right now. And sometimes, you know, so we wonder sometimes, what profound amends can I make to them? Has nothing to do with intention, promise. We can't bribe them anymore. It doesn't matter how many good things you and I do. When we come home drunk, it's all canceled out. It means nothing. The only amends we can make to ourselves and our loved ones is stay off the booze a day at a time. The rest of the program will follow little by little, but we got to start somewhere, you know. Okay, now we come down to the thing here. You know, I like to say this to you. There was that time when I had that revelation, that moment of clarity, when this thing was a gift. You know, I stood out at night and meditated, and I said, why? Why was I so lucky that I saw it and grabbed it and ran with it? Why didn't my brothers? They needed it as much as I did. How many people have you and I tried to 12-step and help over the years? They don't want what we got. It's incredible, you know. And then we wonder, what is going on here, you know? You know, it was like Alan McGinnis says, you know, wherever you and I go for help, you know what's wrong with you? Tell me. And then they write it up. They tell all our seekers and all our more. I said, that's, for God's sake, why I drink. And then, you know, that's how it is. And then you come into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Hi. You know what was wrong with me? And this is what I have done about it. Come on in and have a cup of coffee and sit down at your home. You know, we don't put them on the defensive right away. You know, it's a beautiful thing. Chuck Chamberlain and Elsa, his wife, all the years they were amongst us, shows what's going on in these rooms. It's called love with no conditions. Love with no conditions. You and I can be who we are and what we are, and in spite of it, we are loved. There's nothing like it on the face of this earth. And then this ism we have. It makes us belong. We belong to each other. There's a sense of belonging in these rooms at times is haunting. It's a fact of reality. Alone we cannot do it. But together we can. The room, the group, the fellowship will carry us when we can't care for ourselves. It's a beautiful thing. You know, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, nobody wanted us. You know, I mean, you know what they did with drunks before Alcoholics Anonymous? Put them in nut houses, gave them electrical shock treatments and heavy medication. You know, there was no cure until this thing, a love with no condition that goes on here. It's fantastic. You know, when I came into alcoholism, the American Medical Association says alcoholism is the number one killer, the second contributor to insanity. It's what we have. It's still the same today. You know, we never fit in out there. We could never be part of it. We always wish we were somebody else. But thanks to this way of life, the 12 steps and sponsorship and everything else like that, you and I can live out there. We fit in. We're part of it. I'd be so bold to say many of us live out there like we don't have the illness. Tell that to a guy who have heart and cancer. You know, you and I are no victims. Thanks to this way of life, you and I have an opportunity to participate in life and living. You know, this is not a punishment here. It gives us all hope. We can make it and we can do and we can become self-supporting and life is going to fall in place for us. That was the beautiful thing about this thing. You know. And, you know, it's 20 after, and you don't dare to go overtime in this outfit. They drive the old-timers crazy. I have a friend in Glendale. His name is Bob Lemke, and he's a full-blooded German. And I had a little problem with the Germans during the war, you know what I mean? I knew him for 4 years, and I realized I loved him. Great AA guy, helped a lot of people. He talks funny. That guy, he was born in this country, has more of an accent than I have. Must practice every night or something, The last 27 years, Bob has invited me to Glendale to talk on his birthday. 27 years. Now, last January, he was 39 years sober. But the first year I was there, I stood out the door. It was 10 o'clock, and I had a minute and a half to wrap up my story. But he was one of those guys, you don't save any souls after 10, buddy. So it's 10 o'clock, and I'm standing there trying to finish off, and he says, John, for God's sake, it's 10? I said, Lemke, this is only an AA meeting. We ain't marching into Poland tonight, You all knew. If you can just believe this, we only wish you well. We only want good things for you. If you can just believe that and take that with you, you will never wake up lonely anymore, because by now there's a way to go and to live. And abstinence, to abstain from. Abstinence is a spiritual environment. It isn't natural for alcoholics not to drink. But as long as you and I have abstinence, we have a chance. And we come to these meetings, and we sit here, and we cannot help but identify. Sometimes there are moments of clarities, It's a beautiful thing that goes on here, And the longer I stay sober, I have a deepest belief that God wouldn't let us go through all those things and then bring us in here and show us this way to live if He didn't have any plans for us. It really wouldn't make any sense at all. So you all knew. Do this, do what we do. Don't drink and come to meetings. It's the best deal in town. Thank you.